My name is Robert Brook, and you're watching The Broken Record on YouTube. And today I want to talk about Julie London's debut on Liberty Records. Julie is her name. It's one of my favorite female vocal records, and I think a favorite of a lot of people, a lot of audiophiles in particular. It's extremely well recorded, and it's a wonderful performance and just a captivating record. And one of the things that makes the record so wonderful to listen to is it's just a very tubey sounding record. And even if your system is like mine and you have no tubes at all, if you play this record, or at least the right copy of it, it'll sound like you're using tube electronics throughout. Came out in 1955, and back then you didn't have transistors in electronics, so you've got tube electronics being used for the recording process, you've got tube electronics being used for the mastering process, and it just sounds so much that way. Now, I'm of the opinion that a lot of audiophile equipment these days sounds too tubey, and not just the tube equipment necessarily, but even some of the solid state stuff. Some combination of either the amplification and or the speakers that are out these days, or the wires in the system. I feel like the sound is become too tonally rich, just in general. Now you may not agree with that, and that's fine, and I could be wrong. But when I hear other people's systems, my system does not sound like their system. My system I'm using, you can read about my system on my website, thebrokenrecord.net. And there's a page where I go through my system in quite a bit of detail. In my system, I'm using a vintage Japanese amplifier. Let's leave it at that. I don't talk about what exactly I use for various reasons, which I explain on my website. So I use this vintage Japanese amplifier, and it's a very, very neutral and fast sounding amplifier. Some might say a little bit on the lean side. I don't happen to think that's true. I just think, as I said, that most of the amplifiers that audiophiles are using these days tend to be a little bit on the tonally rich side. In any case, when I play Julie Is Her Name on my system, it sounds like I'm using tube amp, tube preamp, tube phono preamp, even though I'm not. And it's a wonderful sound. So on my website, I'm going to post this video in combination with a short article that I wrote where I tell a story about this record, and the kind of that story is what led to me making this video. So I'll let you read that for the full story if you're interested. But basically, I had an industry guy coming over and to demo some equipment, and I mainly I just wanted him to come because I wanted him to hear my system and hear what I was doing, because I feel like what I'm doing is really different than what 99% of audiophiles are doing these days. And also very, very good. So I was curious to see what he would think. So he came over, and I thought, I want to play him a record that sounds like it's being played on your more typical audiophile system. In other words, I wanted to play a record that sounded really, really tubey. So I played him the first track from the first side of Julie Is Her Name. And needless to say, he was impressed. So it's, if you're not familiar with the record, it's simple arrangements. It's Barney Kessel on guitar, electric guitar. So this album's recorded at Liberty Records. Barney Kessel's done a lot of work, did most of his work at Contemporary Records, at least during that time period. And then Julie singing, and then on bass, a gentleman by the name of Ray Leatherwood, which I was not able to find much about him. Unfortunately, because I was really hoping to find a photo of him, because the name Ray Leatherwood, I conjures an image in my mind of like what this guy would look like. It just, I mean, I don't know, there's something about that name Ray Leatherwood. It just sounds like the man was like, you know, once he was named that, he was born to play stand-up double bass. Anyhow, couldn't find a photo. Maybe that's better, so I can just move forward with my image of him. Anyway, so it fascinates me how you can listen to a record like this from 1955, and at the same time it'll sound, it sounds so much like a record from 1955 in some ways. But at the same time, if it's played back well and you get a good copy of it, the sound is so immediate and natural and transparent and live sounding that it sounds like it was just recorded yesterday. I just find that fascinating. You can have a record that is at once very much a product of its era, and at the same time sounds so fresh and so now, it takes your breath away.
In this world of ordinary people, extraordinary people, I'm glad there is you.
If you don't already have a copy of Julie Is Her Name, and you're a fan of female vocal records, then you have got to get a copy of it and try to find a good one, which is really kind of the point of this video, which is to talk about how it's ridiculously hard to do this, and for various reasons, which I'm going to get into. One of them being that there aren't really that many copies out there. I did not have good results with the later 60s reissues of the album. Maybe there are good ones, I really don't know, but I've heard several different versions of the early pressings from '55, and they're pressed at several different pressing plants. There's a Scranton version, and there's various stampers for the Scranton. There's a version pressed at the Los Angeles pressing plant, and there's a version pressed at the Hollywood pressing plant, as well as at Indianapolis. So you go looking for them, and which one should you get? If you don't already know, which one you're looking for, if you're not really sure, then you just have to kind of take a stab at it. And I fortunately had the copy that I played for this gentleman, which is one of the different versions pressed at Scranton. Like I said, there's a lot of different stampers, so you know, you could buy one Scranton and another Scranton, and they could be completely different from one another, which turned out to be the case because I ended up with 2 Scranton copies doing this. Sometimes when a record's been pressed at a number of different pressing plants, they're using the same metalwork. That's probably what it is. They're probably using the same lacquer to produce several different sets of metalwork and then shipping that around to different pressing plants. Now, that is not the case with this record. It appears when you look at the matrices, at the runouts on the different copies, at least the ones I've looked at, they all look different. And so each one is likely being mastered by either a different person or maybe same person, but doing you know, different mastering jobs. I can't really tell you. What I can tell you is that the mastering is different on each of the different versions that I heard. So that just makes it that much tougher to find a really good one. Now, you would think that mastering a record like this wouldn't be all that difficult. You have the vocal, you have the guitar, you have the bass. But it turns out that I guess it's harder than you'd think, because some of these mastering jobs are good and some are not as good, and it's interesting to play different copies and hear how the vocal sounds different, how the bass sounds different, how the guitar sounds different, how they all work together, how much, you know, how musical it is, how musical that the outcome was for that particular mastering job. So the different mastering, different versions is one of the challenges here. But another challenge is that you get a copy and they are noisy, and it seems that a lot of them are.
In this world of ordinary people,
I ended up buying 5 copies, but I quickly got to the point where I realized that they tend to be noisy, and so I started preemptively asking sellers on Discogs if they would play test them for me and tell me, are they noisy or do they play quiet? And some of them were actually willing to do that, and in some cases they would confirm, yes, this one is noisy too, and then I typically wouldn't buy that one. But in some cases, you'll have a copy that plays pretty well on one side and not so great on the other side. So getting 2 good sides is a big challenge. And you know, even in some cases, you have a copy that, you know, sounds quite good on one side, and then on the other side, it sounds significantly worse. Like,
say it isn't so. Say it isn't so. Everyone is saying you don't love me. Say it isn't so.
in any case, it can be frustrating to find a good copy of this record. I even at this point, I don't have a copy that plays well on both sides and sounds really good on both sides. I've kind of got all 3. I've got a copy that plays really well on both sides but doesn't sound good on either side. And then I've got a copy that plays really well or reasonably well on both sides but doesn't sound great on one of the sides. In fact, sounds terrible on one of the sides. And then I've got a copy that sounds quite good on both sides, but both sides are pretty noisy, particularly the second side, which is noisy to the point of being, unfortunately, borderline unacceptable. I think for a lot of people it would be, but I've got a high tolerance for surface noise on records. Anyway, when you find a copy that you like, or that plays reasonably well and sounds good, it can sound so good. So it is certainly worth your effort, because if you find such a copy and you have not already fallen in love with this album, you will fall head over heels. It is just a wonderful and wonderful sounding record.
Now you say you're lonely. You cry the long night through. Well, you can cry me a river.
In my last video, which you may have seen, and if you haven't, I would recommend it. It's I conducted a shootout with Thelonious Monk's Brilliant Corners. But one of the things I said on that video is that I don't think audiophiles, analog audiophiles, challenge themselves enough to play difficult records. Meaning, if you play difficult records and your system doesn't play it well, then if you're so inclined, which I very much am, and I condone this approach, or I advocate for this approach, you take steps to be able to play that record. Particularly if it's a record that you really like, you want your system to be able to show it off just as well as a record that's easier to play. In fact, it's even more rewarding when you can get your system to play a difficult record. Julie Is Her Name is not a difficult record to play. I think it would sound good on a lot of different systems. But it is a challenging record to track down a copy that you know are going to be happy with. And when you find the right copy, just the immediacy and the realness and the naturalness of the record is so captivating that you just, it's worth all that effort. Once again, my name is Robert Brook. My website is thebrokenrecord.net. If you want to read more of my articles and see more of my videos, you can access them at my website. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.